The coronavirus has completely uprooted everyday life. Social events are canceled, people can't go into work or school, and social distancing measures are proving to be economically and emotionally taxing on most people. That's why it's not surprising that most people are looking for a light at the end of the tunnel. And for many, antibody testing kits have the potential to be just that. A new form of testing for the coronavirus. They have been hailed as a potential solution to the disease. In fact, the CDC has encouraged the production and distribution of these antibody testing kits, and in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has hailed them as a, quote, game changer. And that's why it's essential that we ask ourselves today's question. Will effective antibody testing kits be the key to reopening America's economy? The answer is unfortunately no, because first, different people have different responses to the coronavirus, making accurate testing kits very hard to develop. Second, we've already seen issues with existing antibody testing kits. And lastly, the so-called immunity passport idea has very little basis in evidence. So, to first look at why antibody testing kits are unfortunately not the solution to the economic effects of the coronavirus, we need to look at why they're not effective. Antibody testing kits are unlike typical testing kits for the coronavirus in that they don't test for the virus itself. They test for the body's immune response to the virus. They search for certain antibodies that are typically released when the body encounters the coronavirus to determine whether or not someone has had the coronavirus before. But according to Vice on April 8th, not everyone responds to the coronavirus in the same way. Different people may release different antibodies. So it's hard to develop a testing kit that will cover everyone's response to the coronavirus. In addition, some people may release antibodies that are also released from different diseases or different immune events. So it's hard to develop accurate testing kits that avoid false positives or negatives. In addition, according to Nature on April 18th, scientists still don't know when the body releases antibodies after a patient has had COVID-19. So patients may be given antibody tests too early to actually determine whether or not they had the coronavirus, leading to false negatives. Because people respond to the coronavirus differently, it's hard to make a one-size-fits-all solution and testing kit to test if someone has actually had the coronavirus. And that leads to a lot of false positives and false negatives, which brings us to the next point, that we've already seen a lot of issues with existing antibody testing kits. According to NBC, just yesterday, the CDC has recently had to tighten its guidelines for antibody testing kits because of concerns that the ones on the market are extremely inaccurate and even fraudulent. We've also seen this in the UK, where after officials released 4 million antibody testing kits for civilian use, they later warned UK citizens that the antibody testing kits weren't actually all that accurate. We've seen this again and again when studies have looked at the accuracy of antibody testing kits. In fact, a study published in Nature on April 18th found that antibody testing kits really aren't all that accurate. Ideally for disease testing kits, there should be an accuracy rate of about 99%, meaning that a false positive or false negative turns up about 1% of the time. But they found that most antibody testing kits have an accuracy of about 80 to 90%, and that some antibody testing kits can have accuracy rates as low as 40%. That means that some of these testing kits are turning up false positives or false negatives more often than not, and at a time when it's really crucial that Americans know for sure whether or not they have the coronavirus, and obey social distancing measures and inform their friends and family as such. We really can't have this amount of false positives and false negatives. And this could actually be a danger to society. Because if Americans think that they don't have the coronavirus when they really do, they could be more lax about social distancing measures and potentially spread the disease even further. But even if these disease testing kits were 100% accurate, which they aren't, the effect that they could have on reopening the American economy is still more limited than people initially thought. And that's because the quote immunity passport idea has very little basis in evidence. So what is the immunity passport idea? Well, according to Vice on April 8th, many people thought that these antibody testing kits could have a large potential to reopen the American economy because they would tell us which people had the coronavirus before. That's because many people thought that when you had the coronavirus, you were immune to it and couldn't get it again. And they thought that people who had had the coronavirus before could therefore be very lax about social distancing measures and could even start going back to work and school and reopening the economy. However, according to ABC, on April 17th of this year, according to the World Health Organization, there's, quote, no evidence that having the coronavirus before makes you immune to it, and no evidence that these antibody testing kits can accurately determine whether or not someone is actually immune to the coronavirus. So even if we know that someone has had the coronavirus before, that doesn't mean that they're immune to having it again. So that means that these people can't be more lax about social distancing measures and that we can't start reopening the economy with people who have already had the coronavirus. So, when we look back at today's question, will effective antibody testing be the key to reopening America's economy? We see that the answer is unfortunately no. Because first, different people have different immune responses to the coronavirus, making it hard to develop a one-size-fits-all accurate test. Second, we've already seen major problems with existing antibody testing kits. And lastly, the immunity passport theory has very little basis in evidence, making it unlikely that the antibody testing kits will be effective at reopening the American economy. So, while many people may hail these antibody testing kits as the solution to the coronavirus, it turns out that they may not be as much of a game changer as people might think.